All right, hello. Welcome back. It is week 10 for COMM-7018. I see I got a few viewers here on the stream. First thing I need to know, is the audio working? Can you hear me okay? So just say something in that chat box. Let me know how that audio is. There's also a little bit of a delay between when I talk, when the stream gets out to you, and when I read your comments. There's about a 30-second delay. So I will be responding to your chat comments, but just be aware it might take a minute or so before I can respond to you. So this week my plan is to spend about an hour on the live stream. I'm going to be doing two things. First, it's going to kind of orient ourselves now that we're moving online, talk about the new course schedule, talk about some of the changes to the assignments that I've made, specifically the presentation assignment. Then I'm going to go over the material. I don't plan on taking the full 2 hours. I don't think people are willing to watch 2-hour videos. But it's nice to be here. Oh, I see that the audio, Ian says audio is good. Rashub says, yes, it is. You can hear me. That's perfect. So again, two things we're going to be doing today, talking about the class and how we're going to move forward online, and then the material on presentation skills. So let's do that today. Again, if you're watching this live stream later, this video is going to be saved to YouTube. I hope that it's useful in terms of understanding the course material we're going to be talking about today. If the slides are self-explanatory, then you don't have to watch the full thing. And I'm always available over email if you have any questions or concerns about the class moving online. So, how's everyone's quarantine doing? Are we okay self-isolating? I know everyone's. I've been at home for just a week or so. Feels like a month. So I was reading your comments in the forums. Everyone's been impacted by this coronavirus pandemic that's happening, so stay safe out there. Wash your hands and, learn a skill. So if everyone's good, here's how we're going to try and move this course material online. First of all, everything's going to get pushed back a week, right? Because classes were canceled for 1 week, and this week we came back. So starting this week, all right, this is week 10. I'm going to talk about presentation skills, and the case study assignment is now due the 29th. All right, I think that's Sunday night. So you still have up to the end of this week and the weekend to finish our case study assignment. I've talked about it a few times in class already, but if you have any further questions or you're not sure how to do it, how to write it, how to proceed with this memo on the topic of, I think, political correctness on college campuses, then by all means send me an email or ask anything you need. Moving forward, we're going to be looking at having the research report due April 12th, and then you'll have 2 weeks more or less to convert that to an individual presentation, and that's the big change. The group presentations are canceled. We're going to have shorter individual presentations. So you're going to take your research report and turn it into a presentation. But of course, we won't be presenting in class. Instead, you're going to convert the content of your research report into a presentation using something like PowerPoint, Google Drive, or any software you like, and then you're going to have to upload those slides to FOL for me to look at. You're also going to have to do a second thing, which is actually present it. Now, how can you do that? If you go to FOL, you'll see I've given you three options. The first option is a screen capture. Now, a screen capture means you are going to be doing more or less what I'm doing right now, recording a video of yourself narrating your slides and giving your presentation and uploading that video somewhere. There's really excellent software that's easy to use that you can find online. I can link some recommendations on FOL if you need them. Are we allowed to put the things we wrote in our report in our presentation as well? Absolutely. In fact, that's the exact idea. You're going to want to take your research report and just turn that report into a presentation where you're walking through your presentation. A research report usually goes into more detail. A presentation is kind of an overview. It's going to be shorter. It's going to be more to the point. And your presentation material, the slides, are supposed to kind of supplement your speaking. So yes, please put the things you wrote in your report in the presentation. So to get back to what I was trying to say, we have three options. You can screen capture your presentation. You could take your smartphone, second option. So take out your smartphone, and then you could take a video of yourself narrating your presentation. You can have that presentation up in the background on a computer screen, and then just, talk your way through your presentation. Third option, upload your slides and just write your script. Open a Word document and write the script of what you would say if you were presenting. So typically presentation slides only have a little bit of information. We're talking bullet points, short summaries, and your narration is what you would say to accompany the presentation, which has less detailed information. So by writing a script and uploading it along with your slides, I get to see what you would have said. It's kind of it's the low-tech solution. I think it's more work to type something out, but if you're not comfortable recording a video with your smartphone, if you're not sure how to do a screen capture, just writing a 1 or 2 page script, I think might be the easiest way to finish that presentation. So to summarize, your presentations are now individual work, no groups. You have to upload your slides. Your slides are based on your research report. And to accompany these slides, I want to see either a screen capture, and if you don't know what that is, you can also use your smartphone to record yourself, or you can open a Word document and you can type a script. Presentations don't need to be very long. When they were group work, I usually expect a longer presentation. We're looking at 8 to 10 minutes. But since you're going to be flying solo, working by yourself, I don't expect an 8 to 10 minute presentation. 3 to 5 minutes is sufficient. So make that 3-minute presentation on the basis of your research report. That's the one big change, and you have till April 24th to do it. All that information is on FOL. I go into a lot more detail. You need to go to evaluations, submissions, and then open the presentation instructions. All right, again, why don't, let's see if I can do that on the live stream here. So we're at the home page for COMM. I'm going to open evaluations, click submissions. Here are our submission folders, and as you can see, I have revised due dates for all our assignments, and I have revised instructions for the individual presentations as well. Oh. Where are those instructions? Here they are. Here they are. So I have suggestions for screen capture software and the different options you have for your presentation. So it's not enough to just upload the slides. I also want to see either a screen capture, a smartphone video, or a short script indicating what you would have said. what did I say, 3 to 5 minutes? Let me just put that 3 to 5 there. All right. Otherwise, things are going to proceed more or less as planned. The only difference has to do with the due dates, which are all online. And if you have any other questions, just please let me know, either over live chat or by email pretty much anytime. Next week, we're going to go back to our readings. I think we have some readings on a disability in the workplace. Keep commenting in the forums. I read the ones for this week on how people are holding up during self-isolation. There were some really interesting comments, for example, on the link between social distancing and different cultural kind of approaches to personal space and things like that. I see a couple of questions here in the chat about the presentation, so thanks for those questions. For the script, Haley says, are we able to put it in the speaking notes of the PowerPoint for each slide? That's actually a great idea. I wish I had thought of that. Yes, you can, and I will go and edit the assignment instructions to say that you can specifically do that. That's a very smart idea. Thanks for bringing that up, Haley. Nada asks, how would you like us to submit it if we decide to do it on the smartphone? Have you got a couple of options there? You can upload it to YouTube as an unlisted video and send me the link. If it's unlisted, only people with the link will see it, and give the link to me. Otherwise, actually, FOL allows you to upload very large files. So if you can figure out how to share that file to FOL, you can do that as well. So as part of your, when you go to evaluation submissions and then you submit your assignment, you should have the option to upload very large video files as well. So any video sharing service online, send me the link or upload it straight to FOL. So thanks, those are really excellent questions. And as always, keep commenting in those forums. If you go to the gradebook, finally, you might notice that I'm a little bit behind on some things. I hope to be able to catch up on my grading over the next week or so. So thanks for your patience. These are extraordinary circumstances. So even though group presentations in class are canceled, obviously group work is not viable. The campus is closed to everyone but essential workers. It's still one of the really critical course learning outcomes that we're supposed to talk about public speaking a little bit. So I'm going to try to be brief. I'm going to go over the material I have on public speaking and presenting. And usually I break up presentation skills in 3 kind of major key concepts. We're going to think about organization. We're going to think about delivery, which is kind of the speaking aspect of public speaking, and design, which is a little bit talking about the slides themselves. Now, we've already talked about visual design in class, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So really the focus is going to be on organizing presentations and delivering them, and a little bit about slide design, but not quite as much. And I know a lot of people don't like public speaking. Most people are pretty nervous about it, actually, but it's a pretty crucial skill. As the textbook that I use in some of my other comm classes, Business Communication Now, says, the #1 predictor of success and upward mobility is how much you enjoy public speaking, how effective you are at it. Speaking skills are really high on wish lists for recruiters. Spoken communication often takes the top spot as the most desirable of the soft skills. It's more important than a strong work ethic, than ability to engage in teamwork. And it's easy to understand why, because without strong communication, all your other skills are not really being leveraged or used properly, right? Communication is that one foundational skill that allows you to work in a team, that allows your work ethic, to kind of integrate in an organization. And the ability to speak just confidently in front of a group of people, because in a way it's rare, does make you stand out. So something I think you should really work on. So I'll be talking about, in terms of public speaking, three things: organization, which refers to how your presentation and the ideas in it are organized, how they're structured, how they're paced. Also about delivery, right? How you speak during the presentation, your emphasis, your inflection, whether you use humor, gestures, and so on. And finally, a little bit about design, how your presentation looks. So let's talk first about organizing your presentation. And again, I'm keeping an eye on those comments here, so if you want to stop at any point and say, hey, can you explain this, or you're going too fast, just let me know. This is actually only my third live stream ever, so I'm still getting a bit used to talking by myself in my basement office. All right, so I'll be also skipping some slides to try to keep this more brief. I want to keep it to roughly an hour. So when you're organizing your presentation, you should have the presentation equivalent of a thesis statement, and that's the purpose statement. As you prepare your presentation, you should be asking yourself, what do I want my listeners to remember, or what do I want my listeners to do after the presentation? And your purpose statement is going to answer this question in a complete way. So your purpose statement will guide the development of your presentation and its organization. So in terms of the three stages of writing, right? Pre-writing, drafting, and revising, your purpose statement is definitely part of that pre-writing stage. So there's a nice example presentation in the book, in a communications textbook for my other class that I always go back to because I think it's such a nice example of public speaking. The example is a loan officer tasked, and his job, he's going to give advice to small businesses seeking to borrow money. So he has to give a talk. So his purpose statement for this example presentation was, quote, to inform potential entrepreneurs about three important factors that loan officers consider before granting startup loans to launch small businesses. So that's an example purpose statement, right? To do something using some methods is kind of generally the template we're going to be thinking of here, right? So to goal by methods. So for example, my purpose statement when I was putting together these slides was, right, to teach people how to prepare effective business presentations by evaluating the audience, organizing information, using appropriate delivery techniques, right? To goal by some method. To inform by telling them something. Another important part of the kind of preparation and pre-writing stage as you're organizing your material is thinking about your audience. Way back in the early weeks, I talked a little bit about audience analysis and direct versus indirect writing strategies. Right? In the direct strategy, of course, we get right to the point. In the indirect strategy, right, we have a buffer first, we contextualize some information, we give some reasons, then we deliver news that people maybe are either will be unhappy about or are not receptive. So much like for writing, public speaking also engages in audience analysis, which will affect the structure. So if your audience is generally positive, they can be involved right off the bat. Just be pleasant, be open. You can definitely structure your presentation with personal examples and experiences right off the top. You can go straight to the thesis statement. If your audience is more neutral, right, it might be better to kind of present both sides of an argument. You can incorporate audience questions. You're definitely going to want to lead with facts and statistics and expert opinion rather than your personal example or experiences in terms of structure. If your audience is just negative, You're going to have to write, and there's a couple different ways they can be negative. They could be uninterested, in which case you should be brief, stick to the main points, right? Keep things dynamic, open with something startling, right? Something colorful, something that'll capture their attention. If you're just coming into a hostile audience, right? The most important thing here is to be calm and controlled. See if there's sources or data that's not likely to be challenged. Generally speaking, you're going to want to avoid anecdote or humor, but it might work to get them on your side. A hostile audience can occur for any number of reasons. You could be delivering bad news to your organization. You could be announcing layoffs, that sort of thing. In which case, right, that kind of indirect strategy might definitely be the best way of doing it. So that's all part of kind of thinking about your audience in terms of presentations. So again, I'm going to be skipping some slides here. You can go back and look at them. I'm going to kind of focus on the main points. One of the really important things to do when you're setting up your presentation, when you're organizing your ideas, is to realize the extent to which, as a speaker, you kind of control the information flow. You control the speed and the pacing, and especially you control the signposting. What I mean by that is audience attention. And as students, you should definitely know this. Audience attention kind of like dips and comes back, right? People get distracted, right? In a 2-hour class, nobody, and I don't expect any student to be absolutely focused and interested the whole time. It's normal. You pick up your phone, you look at it, you look out the window, you get distracted. So when you're engaged in public speaking, it's really important you give the audience opportunities when their attention wavers and comes back. That when their attention comes back, they have lots of opportunities to understand what you're saying and where you are in the overall pattern of the presentation. In other words, you should kind of be doing more repetition than you would do in your writing. Because if you're writing something and the reader doesn't understand, the reader can always just reread it. If you're watching a video, right, you can always rewind the video to watch it again until you kind of understand what's happening. But when it comes to public speaking, there's no rewind. You can't go back and re-listen to what the speaker just said. So the speaker has to do it. The speaker has to repeat things more often than they would if they were writing something out. So what you should do is think about like a threefold repetition. Tell them what you're going to say it, and then tell the audience what you just said. This is kind of word for word from a business communications textbook, but it really reminds me of Chris Rock and the way he delivers jokes. It's nice because it helps reduce uncertainty and ambiguity and establish what the idea in the audience. So here's an example from a Chris Rock stand-up special, like that's 20 years old now. But notice the repetition here. You don't need gun control. You know what you need? We need some bullet control. Man, we need to control the bullets. That's right. I think all bullets should cost $5,000. $5,000 per bullet. You know why? Because if a bullet costs $5,000, there would be no more innocent bystanders. So notice the threefold repetition here, right? Control is repeated 3 times. 5,000 is repeated 3 times, right? You repeat information at pre-planned intervals so that when the audience stops paying attention and starts paying attention again, right, they know exactly what's happening right away. They're not kind of lost in the information you're giving because you're setting up you're setting up your information at pre-planned repeated intervals, right? Because you're tell people what you're going to do it, tell them what you just done. Let me actually go a little bit ahead here to give you an example of what I mean by the importance of repetition. So earlier I gave you the example of a purpose statement from a loan officer who is going to give a speech about, what factors does he evaluate before he gives money to a startup business. So let's look really closely at some of the repetition that he makes. So let's look at the transition right here. So the transition is really important. It's a signpost saying, hey, I'm done with the introduction. I'm going to start talking about the body, and I'm going to develop my main points. He says, I have suggestions in 3 areas: experience, preparation, and projection. So now what he's doing there is saying, hey, I'm about to tell you something. Then he goes to the body. First, let's consider experience. Now I'm telling you something. You must show that you can hit the ground running. Now we're doing the thing where here's what I just said. Here's what I'm going to say. I said it. Here's what I just said. So in this this piece of public speaking, right, where a loan officer is explaining why, under what conditions he gives money to people to start their businesses, right? He says, one of the things I talk about is experience. Let's consider experience. You must show you can hit the ground running. Here's what I'm going to say. I said it. Here's what I just said. So no matter where the audience is in terms of how engaged they are, right, they know exactly, right, when you start paying attention again, you know where you are in this really well-structured piece of public speaking. We're going to look at that in some more detail. Let me go back a little bit. So, with this in mind, you're generally going to want to split up your presentation in 3 parts. Right? You're going to open with an introduction where you capture audience attention. You're going to establish your credibility as a speaker. Then you're going to preview your points. That's kind of the things you want to do in the introduction. Capture attention, establish credibility, and preview your points. Then you're going to move on to the body, which is where you develop these points using some kind of organizational pattern, maybe most important to least important, maybe chronological. It really kind of depends on the nature of the information you're presenting. I think for your presentations, right, as long as each point is kind of nicely separated, you don't need to worry about the organizational pattern too much. The important thing to remember here is that during this part here, where you're actually talking about your research, that's where you're more likely to lose your audience because, right, you're giving a lot of dry kind of information. So here's where you need to do a little bit more work here to not lose that audience. And conclusion is where you summarize and repeat the main points. So that's how you're going to want to be structuring your overall presentation. A clear introduction, right? A body where you kind of develop the information, right? And it's always, again, it's important you repeat yourself sufficiently. You create these signposts so people know that you're making a transition from the introduction to the body, and then another transition from the body to the conclusion. So let me just check the comment box here. All right. Again, I am keeping an eye on those on the chat, so if I'm going too fast or if you have any questions, just let me know. So let's look at, again, let's look at that example presentation, example short presentation, and let's look at again in terms of structure. So the presentation was titled, "What Makes a Loan Officer Say Yes?" That's a great title. It appeals to the audience because presumably if you're going to see this talk, you're interested in hearing that yes because you're interested in getting startup capital for your business. So again, let's look at this transcript. What makes a loan officer say yes? So we have audience involvement. And right off the bat in the introduction, you capture attention. How many of you expect one day to start your own business? How many of you have all the cash available to capitalize that business when you start? So a couple things here. We capture attention by using, in this case, we use rhetorical questions that the audience might have asked themselves already. And we start with the you view, and which is something I talked about earlier in the class in terms of writing, which is that you want to involve the audience. You don't want to use too many I statements. You want to use you statements because we want to involve the audience. Right? Like you, nearly every entrepreneur needs cash. And I promise you by the end of this talk, you will have inside information on how to make a loan application that will be successful. All right, so there's some I statements here, but really, again, we're focusing on the audience, what the audience cares about, what they need to know, and what you can deliver to them. So over here, under C, we have identifies the speaker. We're establishing credibility. Right? I make decisions from entrepreneurs like you applying for startup money. One of them, again, this is very deliberate here. Every I statement has a balancing you statement. Right? I make decisions on requests from people like you. So we have a balance between those I's and those U's where we're really involving the audience. All right, so in the main body, we see, right, first let's consider experience. So we have experience, hit the ground running. Right, so again, lots of nice transitions. The word first here is pretty critical because it's telling the audience again, here's my first point. As we continue, we see a transition in addition to experience. Loan officers will want to see that you have researched your venture thoroughly. So these transition statements are really important because, again, if you lose the audience and they're just kind of perking up and listening, if you hear something like in addition to, you're thinking, oh, okay, he's bringing in a new point. And notice he's telling you again he's bringing in a new point. My second suggestion then, so twice the speaker is telling you, by the way, I'm bringing up a new point here. You can't do this too much. At no point will you have done too much of this kind of signposting. We are telling the audience not just your point, right, but you're kind of doing this other thing. We say, here's where we are in the delivery of those points. I think that's a really critical part of a strong presentation. All right, here's another transition. Now that we've discussed preparation, we're ready for my final suggestion. And my last tip is the most important one. All right, so I'm telling you, I'm finished discussing this point. I'm moving to my final point. Here is my final point. All right, again, threefold repetition. So the body the really important thing about the body here is that you have these transition sentences that tell the audience, I've just made a point. I'm finished making my point. I'm going to do another point now. Here is my other point that I'm making. And so just keep hammering that. And if your presentation script doesn't have those, create them, add them in. Have those transition sentences. If you're not sure if you have a transition sentence, try to highlight it. As you read your script, as you prepare what you're going to say, think, where's my transition sentence? And if you can't find it, then make one. Finally, let's look at the conclusion in this example. So the first thing the conclusion does is it summarizes the main points that we've already looked at. Loan officers are likely to say yes to your application if you do three things. Prove you can hit the ground running, demonstrate you've researched, and you projected a realistic picture of your sales. All right, so just a quick summary of all the main points. This is important because the conclusion is often kind of rushed and people don't think a lot about it. They spend a lot of time researching and working on the body up here. But the fact is, you're only really guaranteed to have audience engagement during the introduction and the conclusion. When, your first 30 seconds, people are giving you a chance, so they're going to go like, all right, I'm going to listen. And the last 30 seconds, people are like, oh gosh, he's wrapping up, right? How do you know people are wrapping up? Well, they're getting their papers together, they're kind of shuffling in their seats. You start having that wrapping up tone of your voice. And so, in conclusion, it's like, oh, he's getting done, so you pay attention. So you might have that audience as a public speaker, you might have that audience for the last 30 seconds. So what are you going to do with those 30 seconds? So summarizing is really important because maybe they missed something in the body where you're most likely to lose the audience in the details. And then having final focus, right? Choosing a sentence that kind of resonates so you don't finish with them with something more weak like, well, I guess that's all I have for today, thanks. You don't want to do that. You want to finish with a sentence that feels strong, that lends a sense of credibility to what you've just said. Let's look at the one the loan officer did. Experience, preparation, and projection are the 3 keys to launching your business with the necessary startup capital so that you can concentrate on where your customers, not your funds, are coming from. Right? That's a nice closer. It's not, right? It's because again, you have your audience for those last 30 seconds of the presentation. So leave them with something good, right? You can use the opportunity to give them a strong takeaway, right? Because again, people perk up when they sense things are wrapping up. So, in your conclusion, right, you summarize the main themes, leave the audience with the takeaway, and you have a statement that kind of closes the presentation naturally. You need that punchline. Right, so that again, this is a really nice closer. And one of the #1 problems I see with student presentations is a lack of attention to the conclusion. The conclusion is really kind of one of the most critical parts, right? Because that's when people are paying attention to you. Right, so here are the key 3 things: experience, preparation, and projection, the 3 main points this example presentation talked about. There's a catchy takeaway sentence, right? Why? So you can concentrate on where your customers, not your funds, are coming from. Right? Nice, short, effective close. You can then say, thank you, so then people know you're done. They're more likely to applaud because you have this kind of nice professional closer. All right. So in other words, avoid all, I guess that's all. Thanks for your time. Thanks. Avoid all that, right? If you want to sound professional, have a strong closing. Okay, enough about closing. Let's talk about delivery. So I've talked about organization. In terms of organization, you're going to want to have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, where you first capture audience attention. Then in the body, you have lots of transitions between your points as you give them, and you have a strong closing statement that leaves the audience with a noteworthy takeaway and closes and finishes your presentation naturally. Another important aspect of presenting and public speaking is just how you deliver it physically. So this involves how much you speak, and how you use gestures, how you move around, all these kinds of aspects. It's often also something that people don't really consider practicing or working on when they're getting ready to make a presentation, right? Because you're so focused on getting those PowerPoint slides looking good, on making sure your research report and the visuals all work together. But I think you should really practice, because a critical component of public speaking is just the actual speaking part. And you have to just kind of find your voice. Find your public speaking voice. It can't be your normal voice, your normal speaking voice. You have to practice doing something called projecting your voice. You need to raise your volume enough that you fill the room, but not any more than that, because then you'll be shouting. So try to slowly increase the volume of your voice when you're engaged in public speaking without changing kind of your natural pitch. Pitch refers to how high or how low your voice is. Right? There's a tendency as you increase your volume to increase your pitch. Your voice is higher the louder you are. However, it's kind of an unfortunate truth that people interpret low-pitched voices as more confident. So try not to get too high up as you increase your volume. You can start humming and move on from there. You should be able to fill the room. And what does fill the room mean? It means you should just barely hear the echo of the room back in your ears. So just practice raising that voice until it feels natural. It's a little scary because you don't want to commit necessarily to the volume. We're just going to have to. So imagine your voice is being pushed out from your body when you're in a comfortable, right, but straight posture. Square your shoulders in line with your hips and push it out using your diaphragm. Take some measured breaths. You might feel a little nervous. That's normal. All right. Let your preparation guide you as you project your voice. If you're nervous, you might want to talk fast. I talk too fast. So just remind yourself to slow down a little bit. And you should be able to find a voice that is specifically for public speaking. It's going to be a different voice. And the more you practice it, the more it'll feel like something you're able to just execute. Now, if you want to do some vocal warm-up and practice exercises to kind of create your public speaking voice, here are some examples. Now, usually when I'm in class with people, I make people stand up and do these letters and do these sentences one by one. So I start on one side of the class and I go, okay, you do the first sentence, you do the second sentence, and everybody gets to practice a warm-up sentence. These are ones professional actors use to warm up their vocal cords, warm up their face muscles so they articulate. It's easy to mumble. If you speak too fast, you might slur your speech a little bit. So at home, you should practice with these sentences to create your public speaking voice. Eat each green pea. Aim straight at the game. Ed said get ready. You can exaggerate the articulation in order to do this warm-up and practice creating that public speaking voice. And actors create voices for their characters. And if you think of yourself as embodying the character of who you are during public speaking, you can just kind of switch on public speaking voice. Right? Some of these are actually kind of fun. He feels keen as he schemes and dreams. It sounds like a Kendrick Lamar verse. And if you're nervous, I know a lot of people don't like public speaking. They don't like getting in front of people. So here's my advice for if you don't like public speaking, you want to get better at it, you're scared of it, you should first just prepare and practice. The more you practice and the more preparation you have, the easier it'll be to actually just do the thing, because then the real presentation is just another repetition. If you practice once or twice, then the real one feels really significant because it's only like the third time you've done it. If you've practiced 10 times or 20 times, then the real one, your brain will go like, oh, it's like all those practice ones, right? It's just another repetition. You'll be able to just simply execute because you'll have all this memory of having done it. All right. Remember to breathe. You can just smile. Our brains, our little mammal brains aren't very clever. And if you force yourself to smile, your brain will actually start sending out like happy drugs like dopamine and whatnot because, oh gosh, we're smiling. We have to be happy. Quick, be happy. But it's true. You can research this. Smiling makes you relaxed and happy. You're just gonna have to accept your nerves and that this is energy that's normal and okay. And always remember, most people think of themselves before they think of you. This is in psychology, it's called the spotlight effect. But the fact is, the amount of attention you pay to yourself is always greater than the amount of attention other people pay to you. Most people are, if they're just thinking about themselves. They're not thinking of you that much. And they certainly won't remember the thing you screwed up, or right, nobody's really that focused on you. And I have a nice little article here from The Atlantic. There's a technique called anxiety reappraisal. And it involves thinking about your anxiety as something that is kind of useful, but you have to reinterpret it, right? One of the bad pieces of advice people hear is that you should try calming down when you feel nervous about doing something. But you can't calm down, right? Because you're up, you're amped, you're nervous. Let me just read this paragraph here, right? Uh, don't try to calm down. Instead, the slogan should be, get amped and don't screw up. Anxiety and excitement are both aroused emotions, right? They're up, right? The nervous system kind of is like up and down, really. So the heart beats faster, cortisol surges, the body prepares for action. In other words, they're arousal congruent. That's anxiety and excitement are arousal congruent. That means that they're both up emotions. The only difference is that excitement is a positive emotion, focused on all the ways something can go well. Whereas anxiety is negative, right? Focused on all the things that can go bad. So calmness is positive, but it's low arousal. So if you try to tell yourself to be calm because you're nervous, while you're swapping a negative emotion for a positive one, you're also fighting against the fact that your body is charged up. For most people, it takes less effort from the brain to jump from a charged up negative feeling to charged up positive ones than it would be to get from charged up and negative to positive and chill. In other words, it's easier to convince yourself to be excited than calm when you're anxious. Right? So you can turn the negative emotion to a positive emotion fairly easily, but what's really hard is going from aroused to unaroused, or from up to down. Anyway, read the article if you're the kind of person, like me, who is nervous about public speaking, right? This has really been useful for me. So, when we're talking delivery techniques in language, right, you have to find your voice, find your public speaking voice. You have to practice a lot. And the more you practice, the less nervous you'll be. But if you are nervous, you can do this thing called anxiety reappraisal. Finally, there's another thing I want to talk about here in terms of your delivery techniques, just in your language that you use, which is that you think about adding in every now and again different kind of illustrative techniques in your language to help the audience understand the point better. You can use an analogy, a metaphor, an anecdote, a statistic. Because as you notice yourself kind of going on for longer, you think to yourself, I'm losing my audience here. There is too much information. I need to explain it in a different way. All right, I can say, oh man, product development, it's like a game of football. And well, that might be a way of explaining things. So again, very consciously, as you're writing your script and you're thinking about what you're going to say in your presentation, you might say, you know what, I think an analogy here would really help explain this complex point that I've made. Or maybe a metaphor, an anecdote, right? If I'm presenting on social media use, I might say, I made a mistake on social media once. I said this thing, and right, so the anecdote is a way of kind of like bringing in the audience. So this doesn't have to do with the organization of your overall presentation so much. It's more about how you're going to deliver specific ideas in the context. So you might want to just add those into your presentation at the right moment. And I do really want to reemphasize the importance, as you're doing all this, of signposting. I've talked about this in the organization section, but it's also a pretty important part of delivery, right? You control the rate of information flow, as I've said, and if you notice your audience get lost and they don't know where you are in your presentation, they're kind of looking up and going like, I don't know, and then going back to their phones. Oh, look, I got an email. Okay. Right, you might want to decide, okay, here's a good time to create a signpost. And a signpost is, think about it like a sign on the road. Right? If you're driving along and there's no signs, no street names, no labels on the exits, no stop signs, it's going to be really hard to get where you need to go. So in your presentation, think that you want to be the person putting all these signs up so that the audience looks up and says, oh, here's where I am. So it's something you want to add into your presentation constantly. And you might want to even do it just as a function of audience feedback. How can you do that? You might want to add in specifically, well, the next part of my talk will. You can summarize. We've seen then that. Then you summarize. You could tell them you're changing directions. Moving on from X, let's talk about Y. Or just what we call internal linking, which is what we're doing now. We are talking about this. An important aspect to consider is, so these are all things you can kind of plug in as you're speaking if you notice that you're losing your audience. In terms of the nonverbal aspects of public speaking, one thing that helps you feel confident is that if you could just kind of dress the part. Right? Even if you're at home alone using your smartphone to record your presentation, dress up a little bit. You'll look down and you say, I look sharp. I must know what I'm doing. You can move around and be animated, right? You can emphasize points, you can use gestures. Don't overthink it, just move your hands around. It'll work out. One really important thing is the ability to speak, and the technical term is extemporaneously, which is not from prepared notes, right? And just keep practicing if you find you can't do this. Nobody likes a presentation where people are reading the sentence that they wrote beforehand. It is actually really boring. That's a great way to lose the audience. This is a very difficult skill. I'm hoping that everyone's presentations are going to be more or less extemporaneous. That is, you're not going to be reading from your prepared notes. One thing you could do is just straight up memorize your script. However, even better than memorization is just kind of knowing what you're supposed to be saying. Then you can improv a little bit. Just like, I know I'm supposed to say this, so I'm going to just say it. And again, that's just practice. If you can't speak without notes, without reading, just keep practicing your presentation until you can. And you'll find that increasingly you're relying less on memorization of a script and you're able to just talk your way through your presentation. So you can also punctuate your words with silence, emphasis, tone, pitch. You can vary your facial expressions, right? You're trying to have a real conversation. And again, it's really, really important that you practice beforehand. One thing I often do if I'm giving a talk somewhere is that I use a timer during my practice presentations. So I've given, if I'm giving a talk at a colloquium somewhere, I'm giving my research, and I have 15 minutes. Then during my practices, I'm absolutely going to have a timer just to see if I'm over or under. The more you practice, you'll always know what's coming next. And the more you practice, the more you know the material and can really focus on interacting with the audience, right? And again, practice really is key here. Some other key elements in terms of delivery, things to avoid, right, is apologizing at any point. I'm not good at this, but here we go. Or this might be dumb, but don't say any of that. Just be confident. Also avoid up-talking. Up-talking kind of undermines your point. Up-talking, if you don't know what it is when you kind of end your sentence with an increase in your pitch to make it sound like a question. Pretty much any sentence in English can have this. You could say, I think this is the right idea. That makes you sound unsure. Then the first dude bro that's going to say, I think this is the right idea, and he finishes on a low point, he's going to seem like the confident person, and he's going to take the credit for what you just said. So don't uptalk, because that makes you sound unsure. Right? In a presentation, unless you're actually asking a question, don't ask a question. Right? Because if you're not confident, just pretend to be confident, because people can't tell the difference. You absolutely are who you pretend to be. If you stumble or make a mistake, just ignore it. You're live. The show must go on. On Monday, during my first live stream, I had some slides that were out of order. I was completely surprised when I hit next slide. I was like, oh my gosh, what slide is this? This is supposed to be over here. But I had about 3 seconds of panic, and then I just talked through it, and probably the audience never knew the difference. I used an anecdote. All right. In terms of your presentation materials, so the actual design, how are we doing for time here? Okay, good. 12:55. I've talked about organization. I've talked about delivery. Now let's talk about design. I've talked a lot about visual design and presentations and documents already, so you can go back and look at those slides and kind of use that for your presentations. For just in terms of presentation specific stuff, for us, we're definitely going to be using a PowerPoint. In some cases, so when you're public speaking in other contexts, you might have different options in terms of what kind of presentation to give. So you could use printed handouts in other contexts. Again, for us, we'll definitely be using slides. But if you're public speaking in a different context, sometimes handouts can help instead of using a slide. A slideshow is a little bit of a passive experience. It gives some people something to look at that's not you. So if you really want to engage with the audience, maybe slides isn't as effective as just using a whiteboard. It's just giving people handouts. In some contexts, you might want to have a pre-prepared video. So just think of what you're trying to do when you're asked to give a talk, and choose the best materials that can help you. For us, we're using slides. What should slides generally look like? Well, they shouldn't look like this. Now again, if this was a live class, I'd make us all stop. This is live streaming, but if we were in a classroom, I'd make us all stop and say, hey, what's bad about this slide? Lots of things. The font is bad. I think it's Comic Sans is terrible. The contrast is bad. Right? We have a light color on a light background, very hard to read. The slides are extremely wordy. Right? They're much too long. Strive to have no more than 6 bullets per slide and no more than 6 words per bullet. There's clearly more than 6 words there. It's all uppercase. That's bad. Spacing and capitalization is not consistent here. Right? This is a bad slide. All right, so you're going to want to do the opposite of this. So 6 or fewer bullets per slide is my advice. 6 or fewer words per bullet. You want concise phrases, not long sentences. You want to use a simple typeface, and you want to keep consistent spacing, capitalization, and punctuation throughout. This is slightly better. Right? You can also have like a more of a graphic way of explaining your points. You can do this. You can have little text boxes, right? Again, you go back and look at my visual design slides from a few weeks ago. But the basic idea is, right, you want to not have as many words on the slide as you're saying, because your slides shouldn't just be copy-pasted elements of your research report. It certainly shouldn't be just your script behind you that you're reading from. Right? Your slides are there to assist you. Right? You're scoring the goal. The slides are giving you the assist. Is that a sports metaphor that works? The slides are there to help you, to assist you, but they are not the main show. You're the main show. Right? Here's another graphical version, but the idea here is that actually this was... why is this white text here? Oh my gosh, this is live. Control A. Why is this font? Why did this go white? All right. It's fine. So stuff like this that's more visually Busy, I think it takes a lot of time to set up. It can look inconsistent. It can look too busy. Is it worth the effort to do? That's up to you to decide how much graphic design you really want to put into it. For me, I think honestly, this is the best version. Right? The information is there, and it provides like good information for the speaker to work off from. One last thing. How are we doing here? Um, One last thing I do want to talk about is the difference between uh, sales presentations and kind of informative presentations. So for your presentations, you're going to be just informing people of the results of your research. That was also the example, public speaking kind of transcript that we looked at with the loan officer earlier in the class, right? What makes a loan officer say yes? That is informational. You might be asked in your workplace to do something really different, which is a sales presentation. How to do sales presentation is really tricky. Um, so let me just skip to this example here. So a sales presentation should typically be done using the indirect pattern. The reason is that most people aren't eager to buy anything. You need to kind of convince them. And if you need to convince people of something, that means they're not usually that receptive. And if they're not receptive, you need to use a format where you contextualize the information to convince them to do a thing. So for a sales presentation, you're going to want to do a variation on the indirect format, where you have a buffer, context, reasons, then you deliver the thing that they're going to be resistant to do, which is give you money, right? Because you're engaged in a sales pitch. Here's an example slide deck for a sales pitch that I really liked. And you can click through the link on Medium here. And it modifies the usual indirect format in a new way. So it says, look, here's how you're going to do some sales. You're going to start by saying that the world is changing, and if you don't adapt, things might go bad. If you do adapt, you're going to succeed. We can help you succeed, and here's why you can believe us. Right? So we're establishing credibility down here. Right? We're giving the information over here, right? So this is the actual sales part. All the rest of the stuff up here is context. Right, so I think this is a really nice structure for a sales pitch as opposed to an informative pitch. Your presentations are research presentations. They're informative, so follow the organizational pattern I've talked about earlier in the class. Look at that transcript from the loan officer. Let that be your guide. If in the future you're asked to do a sales presentation, I think this is a really nice way of doing it. Let me click on the link here. Let's hope it loads. It's called The Greatest Sales Deck I've Ever Seen. And let me just look at some of the visual design elements of this sales presentation. So they say you first name a big relevant change in the world. In this example here, we now live in a subscription economy. So the context is a software company that's trying to find clients for the service it provides, which is help people shift to a subscription model for their business. Notice some elements about the slides here, right? We have one main idea, and then we have a big watermarked image in the background. That's again, we have to have these arresting visuals for a sales presentation because we want to keep the audience engaged at every step. We're living in a different era. Again, watermarked visual, one main idea. Right, show there'll be winners and losers. Right. Everyone suffers from what economists call loss aversion. That is, they tend to avoid a possible loss by sticking to what they're doing, the status quo, rather than risk a possible gain by opting for change. So your job as a salesperson is to combat loss aversion. The change you cite will create winners and losers, and if you don't do anything, you might end up losing anyway. So the status quo is not going to help you. You need to change things. So in the last 15 years, 52% of Fortune 500 companies have disappeared. Right? So there's big changes in the world, and if you're not on top of these changes, things might go bad for you. All right, again, just have a look at how these slides are designed. Big watermarked images, one central message on each, and the message serves that central narrative. That there's changes, and if you don't adapt to these changes, things will go poorly. Introduce features as magic gifts, and then present evidence so you can make this story come true. So for sales, right, this is a pretty good structure to use. And it can be applied to almost anything you're trying to sell. Right? In terms of software, right, we had a narrative about companies that don't adapt won't survive. But it could be anything. It could be a car. There's a change in the automotive industry, right? If you don't get this new kind, right, you end up losing money. You'll get a bad car. If you go with us, right, you can believe that we'll take you to this promised land of the better cars. I mean, I'm kind of riffing an example here, but the basic structure is this in terms of sales. Right? You're going to want to bring people along on a story to make that sale happen. So anyway, you just read this article. I think it's a really nice article on effective sales presentations. It's not the focus of public speaking. For this class, you're going to be presenting your research report. But given that sales presentations is kind of its own thing, I thought I should say something about it. Okay. So just to summarize everything we've talked about. All right, your research reports are going to be turned into individual presentations. Your individual presentation should be 3 to 5 minutes long. You can do a screen capture, you can record it with your smartphone, or you can just write up a script, submit that script, you can put it in the speaker notes. When you're writing your presentation, I want you to think about 3 aspects: how you're organizing your presentation, how you're delivering your presentation, and how you're designing your presentation. I'll be grading you on each of these 3 factors. Organization has to do with your introduction, body, and conclusion, how the ideas link to each other, and how you're managing transitions from section to section. Delivery has to do with your speaking voice, with the type of language you use, with your gestures, with your emphasis. Right? Everything that goes into the public speaking part. And finally, I'll also be looking at design. I'll be looking at your individual slides. What kind of visual design elements are you using? Right? What do your slides look like? How much information is it? Am I being overwhelmed by text, or are the slides providing a visual assist to your public speaking skills? So as long as you think about organization, delivery, and design, I think you're going to do a great job with your individual presentations. If you have any questions about how the class is going to proceed online, please let me know. I'm always available by email. If you need to chat with me, we can also figure that out. I will be live streaming classes every Wednesday at noon for about an hour. If you don't like YouTube, send me an email. Maybe we can figure out Zoom for meetings or something like that. I'm just more familiar with YouTube, so it works for me, but it might not work for you. Otherwise, thanks for listening to me for about an hour. Next week, we'll be doing a couple of readings on disability, so have a look at those readings. Head to the comments forum on FOL, and stay safe, stay home. All right, thank you so much for listening. I'll be here for just a minute because of the delay to see if anybody is on the chat. Thanks so much. All right, great. I'll see everyone next week.